Okay, thank you very much, Princess Fasaya Omoyeni. Thank you very much as well. Given the environment I work in, we're protocol people. So I will start with that. As you know, we're given to establishing protocols first. Let me first recognize the convener, Mrs. Princess Bolaji Fasaya Omoyeni. I would also like to recognize, she's the initiative of this program. I would also like to recognize all the speakers, panelists, the moderators, and naturally those that have dialed in to listen to the all-important topic that we're discussing this afternoon. It is indeed an honor and privilege to deliver this keynote address on the occasion of the launch of the African Women Wonder. When my sister, Princess Bolaji Fasaya Omoyeni, extended the invitation, I was awed by her incredible courage and how she has transformed a deeply traumatic experience into a community of hope, advocating for change at all levels. She's indeed an inspiration to me, millions of women around the world to use their voices, their influence, and abilities to transform pain into progress. Grief in Africa is an extremely public affair that has women at the center of it. When women lose their husbands, they immediately shoulder the burden of public bereavement. In a move often castigated by discriminatory cultural practices, they are subjected to stigma, degrading acts, and completely excluded from the decision-making process. Their mental health and physical welfare take a backseat to the performance of grief. Very quickly, let me speak to the issue of cultural practices that I mentioned. For those familiar with this part of Africa and of course the world, you hear about women being asked to shave their hair to prove that they're mourning. Some are required to sleep with their dead husbands' corpses to prove their innocence. This omission becomes more evident after the burial is completed. The status sealed by the final act of committing a body to earth also seals their disappearance. Suddenly, these women who were front and center in shouldering the burden of grief are completely ignored. Economic, social, and cultural indicators do not reckon with them, perpetuating forced invisibility on the widow population. Widows are often evicted, forced into remarriage to relations, and sometimes have their children taken away from them. Taking away the assets, even if jointly owned, remains a constant in most places in Africa, and that includes even their husbands' entitlements. Accounts, even if joint or jointly owned, in most places. According to the World Widows Report published in 2015, the number of widows worldwide stood at 259 million. And with 585 million children, this makes the total population directly affected 844 million. Some 38 million of these widows live in extreme poverty. Taking their dependents into account, there are currently more than 100 million people in the world so poor that their basic needs go unmet as a direct consequence of this injustice, which in turn has deleterious consequences for their community and the wider economy. The scale of this injustice is frightening and an indictment on the social justice systems that are supposed to protect the most vulnerable amongst us. The African Women Wonder has come into being to change this narrative across the continent and beyond by committing to changing the social cultural practices of injustice, discrimination, and exploitation associated with widowhood in Africa. The timing of this launch is symbolic, coming just 3 days after the United Nations designated International Women's Day, celebrated annually on the 20th every year. This year's theme is precise, and I'm glad Princess spoke to it earlier. And it is indeed powerful. Invisible women, invisible problems. It reflects the worrying status of widows as a block that is shunned when considerations for policymaking, lawmaking, and governance are being made. The problems are evident and pervasive. In the same way, we must ensure that our projected reforms and advocacy carry the same weight, permeating the corridors of power and communities where widow maltreatment is steeped in traditional practices. Women-focused leadership and effective policymaking that meet the needs of widows must therefore be at the core of any proposed reforms, or in actual fact, policymaking. The justice system is often the touted recourse when widows speak up against discriminatory practices. Indeed, the rights of widows are enshrined in international law under the Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, which has been in force since 1981 and has 189 member countries of the United Nations as signatories. The convention requires signatory countries to take all appropriate measures to eliminate discrimination against women in all matters relating to marriage and family relations, and in particular to ensure, on a basis of equality of men and women, the same rights for both spouses in respect of ownership, acquisition, enjoyment, and disposition of property. Unfortunately, these explicit provisions struggle to find enforcement in national courts across the continent. They are almost always trumped by prevailing customary laws and traditional burial rights. In Nigeria, CEDAW requires legislative domestication, as provided for by Section 12 of the Nigerian Constitution, to become a national law enforceable in our courts. These universally recognized rights require targeted enforcement and judicial activism to correct customary laws governing inheritance, tenure, and transfer of land. These rights are all important economic rights, crucial to the survival of widows. The judiciary undoubtedly plays a key role in the elimination, must therefore be seen to be more proactive. There are, however, a few shining lights of judicial activism enforcing the rights of widows and children. For example, in 1990, the High Court in the United Republic of Tanzania, in the leading case of Ephraim and Pastore, took account of international human rights treaties, including Article 5 of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and held that the customary prohibition on women selling land was discriminatory, citing the Tanzanian Bill of Rights and Human Rights Convention, including the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. In 2014, the Supreme Court of Nigeria, in the famed case of Ukeje versus Ukeje, in a unanimous decision, found unconstitutional an Igbo customary law excluding females from inheriting their father's property. The court ruled that no matter the circumstances of the birth of a female child, such a child is entitled to an inheritance from her late father's estate. Consequently, the Igbo customary law, which entitles a female child from partaking in the sharing of her deceased father's estate, is in breach of Section 42(1), and of course subsection 2 as well of the Constitution, a fundamental rights provision guaranteed to every Nigerian. In a number of Central and South American countries, including Bolivia, Peru, Brazil, Chile, and Colombia, there are some protections limiting husbands' freedom to dispose of the family estate in their will, guaranteeing widows and children at least a portion. These protections are available in certain states in Nigeria, with the laws governing wills recognizing the provisions of family and dependents, even when the will in question makes no such provision. Section 2 of the Wills Law of Lagos State provides that notwithstanding the provisions of a testator's or testatrix's will, The wife or husband, as the case may be, or the children may apply to the court on the ground that the disposition in the will did not make reasonable financial provisions for his or her dependents. Similar provisions also exist in the wills law of neighboring Oyo State, where the wife or husband of the dead person, a child of the dead person, a parent, brother, or sister of the dead person, so far as such persons were being taken care of by the dead person just before the death of the dead person, may claim rights for reasonable financial provisions. This is indeed a trend that must continue with pooled efforts by not-for-profit organizations, ensuring that these key questions of law around the rights of widows are determined by the highest courts, laying down precedents for the protection of their rights. Information is indeed key to ensuring that this is a reality. Without an understanding of their rights and resources to pursue the enforcement, widows will continue to be marginalized and suffer mistreatment. NGOs, non-governmental organizations across different levels, must collaborate to provide information on land rights, women's rights, equal pay, gender discrimination, and other important issues that underpin their continued discrimination. And they must make representations to the different legislatures across the country. The empowerment of widows is also critical to economic growth and poverty eradication. Any empowerment that ends with just information is incomplete. Widows must be given the tools to achieve self-sustenance, building small businesses, or collaborating to create collective schemes that serve their collective interests. Skills training, adult education, and support grants, as well as other forms of empowerment, are all tools that will yield results. There must be intentionality reflected by the government in the creation of programs and policies for widows. We must be able to point to a particular government entity or ministry that's actively representing and advocating for the interests of widows. Most states in Nigeria have dedicated ministries overseeing the affairs of women and should immediately take this up. This model should be replicated at the state as well as local government levels. This will ensure that programs that improve health, education, legal support, and community relations of widows are implemented. Only then can we measure progress and ask for a seat at the table, because we finally recognize that this is the table created for the interest of widows. Bodies such as the African Wonder Women, must be granted an audience by the government in a bid to create policies that alleviate the suffering of widows. Policy making should not be an exclusionary process that leaves those it is meant to serve in the dark. This defeats the purpose in its entirety. Before I round up, let me confess to how daunting I felt this brief was at the onset. I was at a loss, not being a widow. However, within a couple of minutes, I could count at least 5 widows personally known to me. And that does not exclude my mother, who recently passed on. And I knew it was time to speak up. We all have them around us. Let me also add that we all must start a little bit to add value to the society. Last year, I was able to donate a 200-seater ICT center to my alma mater and hometown. For the first time ever, indigenes and non-indigenes alike, numbering over 400, sat for the JAMB exam in Comprehensive High School Ayetoro, courtesy of the MRS Foundation. It has indeed been an honor to share my thoughts on the policy and leadership gaps that we must collectively fill to advance the recognition of widows' rights across all levels. The bulk of the responsibility lies in our hands as individuals. and in close-knit communities like the African Wonder Women, united in a common quest to advance the rights and recognition of widows. The journey to ensuring that widows and their challenges are visible and acknowledged is a challenging one, but I pledge my voice and support to the cause, and I urge you to do the same. Speak up and advocate relentlessly everywhere and every time. Together we can, and together we will. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much for having me speak to this very distinguished audience, Princess Folaji. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be here to share a few thoughts on what is really a very pertinent issue, particularly post or as we begin to recover as a global community from the effects of the pandemic. It looks like there's no better time to talk about these issues than now. So I really feel really honored to be invited to speak. And my title today is The Impact of Beliefs, Culture, and Tradition on Grief and Widowhood. In the mid-60s, towards the middle and the late part of the 60s, two psychiatrists came together and they wanted to look at the impact of stressful events on physical and mental well-being. What they did was that they gathered about 5,000 patients who had some sort of physical illness, and they wanted to look at their lives, looking back to see whether there had been any stressful events, any emotional trauma that had taken place in the preceding years. And what they found was very profound. One, they found that indeed that a lot of them could say that there had been some sort of traumatic event prior to them becoming seriously physically unwell. But more than that, they also found that you could almost sort of aggregate certain criteria or certain weights to certain life events. So for these traumas, it was like you could almost put a figure to the weight of the trauma on the physical health or the mental well-being of the person involved. And not surprisingly, they found that the loss of a spouse was the most stressful event that had been encountered by the cohort of people that they studied. Not only so, they then went on to allocate a score of 100, which is the maximum score in a stressful life event test. They aggregated a score of 100 to the loss of a spouse, and looked at the other things that could also they looked at the other things that could also be counted as stressful events. Not surprisingly, divorce was allocated a score of 73, and marital separation was allocated a score of 65. The import of those figures is this, that the higher the score that one accumulated over the course of time or during the period of that study, the higher the risk of physical health problems, and also the higher the risk of not recovering fully back to good health. So they found that people who had a score of 300 were 80% less likely to recover back to their full health. The message I'm trying to give to us this evening is this, that bereavement of a spouse, widowhood, is a very, very major life event. And that it is not only a major life event, it is associated with many undesirable outcomes, both for physical and mental well-being, and also social functioning. So if that is the case, then we need to be looking at what are the things that can impact and support women who have lost their husbands or men who have lost their spouses to recovery. And there are studies out there that show us that indeed, what are the things, what makes it different for a woman who loses a spouse to be able to bounce back, and then another woman loses her spouse and she's not able to bounce back as readily? What they found was quite surprising. They found that social support was a very, very key thing in terms of recovery from the adverse effects of widowhood. And not only so, they also found that education, empowerment, literacy, and particularly challenging male dominance in society were factors that were associated with supporting widows to make recovery both physically, mentally, and socially. Now, the question is, my theme here today is the impact of culture, beliefs, and tradition on grief and widowhood. So if we are going to look at the impact of culture and widowhood, culture on widowhood, we need to know what culture is. Culture, as we know it, is a collection of ideas, customs, and social behavior that is peculiar to a particular group of people or society. And we know that tradition is when those customs or behaviors are then passed down from one generation to the other. And we know that grief is really the response to a loss, usually the loss of a person, the loss of a living person. So how does the culture and tradition of a people impact on widowhood and grief? The answer is, what we know from Africa is that from all that has been described by the previous speakers, we know that very commonly women are exposed to discrimination, they're ostracized, they are degraded, they are humiliated, and many times they are also relegated in social hierarchy because of the loss of earning power and because of being denied access to their inheritance. And when you add this picture to the impact of grief, what we have is this, that women in the first year, in fact, people in the first year of grieving, particularly grieving a spouse, are at higher risk of not only being depressed, but also being anxious and also compromised social functioning. So all of these are the impact of undesirable practices, undesirable cultural practices on widowhood and grief. What do we also know? We also do know that the women who are well supported are the most likely to recover from this impact. What we do also know is that when you study women who have lost their spouse, 3 years on, a number of them begin to make recovery. That recovery within a 3-year period is something that is known, but it's only common among those who are well supported. And so with all this in mind, what I want to ask us today is, can we change the narrative of the impact of culture and tradition on widowhood in our communities? And I dare say the answer is yes. So what do we know about the game changers and those who have changed the narratives of their community? The first thing we know about them is that they are people who conceptualized. They are people who are the concept. Princess Folaji has invited us here today because she has a concept, because she has a concept to challenge this status quo. She has a concept to challenge the traditions that are contrary to the well-being of widows in our community, particularly in the African community. And so as a result, she is inviting us to a vision. And what else do we know about people who change, who are narrative changers? The other thing we know about them, apart from the fact that they conceptualize, is that they collaborate. And I want to invite you this evening, I want to encourage you to do all you can to support this vision, to collaborate with Princess Folaji and the African Wonder Woman. And the reason I say this is because we do know that collaboration is very crucial to changing a narrative of a community. The third thing that narrative changers do is that they confront. And I want to encourage you, particularly the men who are on this group, that whatever power you've got, either as a CEO, as a business owner, as a manager, as anything you do in the society, to support this organization in actually confronting the plight of widows, whatever is within your power. I think a good place to start would be to look at the UN website and look at the He for She program that the UN has and that has been alluded to already today. That's a place to start looking at what you can do as a man or as a person to support the plight of widows in your community. And then what else do we know, as I round up, what else do we know about those who change narratives? The other thing we know about those who change narratives is that they are consistent. This is a journey, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. It's going to take years and years of work. However, it's going to be started somewhere. So I challenge you, I encourage you as well, that in your, it's very crucial for you to give support to this and to support this organization, the African Wonder Woman, to continue to do the work that they have started today. And finally, what do we know about people who change narratives? The other thing we know about people who change narratives is that they cooperate with other people. So whatever is within your power, financially, morally, socially, I encourage you to add this to support the African Wonder Women. And finally, why do you need to support this cause? The reason you need to support this cause is that the impact that culture and tradition has on the plight of women, particularly on the plight of widows, is one that is generational. Fancy a woman who loses her husband, who is dealing with grief, becomes depressed and has to raise children. We know that that impact could in fact make those children at risk because they've been bereaved of their dads. They're also been nurtured by a mother who is suffering from depression and who is carrying a mental burden. We know that those children are also experiencing trauma, which could then create generational trauma in terms of them also being at risk of developing mental health problems in their future. We know that for mental health problems, that by the age of 14, 50% of them have been diagnosed, and that by the mid-20s, 75% of people have already acquired their mental health problems. So indeed, it's just more than thinking about the widow here. It's about thinking about the children that the widow is raising, and also about the impact that has on generation, and also the impact that it has on our society at large. I hope with all these things in mind, this will be enough conviction for you to throw your weight behind Princess Folaji, throw your weight behind the African Wonder Woman, and support the work that is being started today. Thank you for listening.
It's not a very easy topic to talk about, and I just want to say thank you, Folaji, for opening up the platform. I articulate myself better in writing, so yeah, today will be one of those, but I do thank you for the opportunity. One thing that I learned in the last year, losing my husband, is that you can never be prepared for the loss of a loved one. My husband had a heart attack on a bank holiday last year. After having dinner, he fell and collapsed, and he was pronounced dead when we got to the hospital. And with all the restrictions, and I think we'd just been about 6 weeks into lockdown, so we couldn't do the hospital, we couldn't do much, but they seemed to allow me in to say goodbye, but I didn't realize that he was dead when we got there. And I kept thinking, I'll take him home, he'll get better, we'll go home. But they said, sorry for your loss. I'm like, what do you mean sorry for my loss? He's going to be okay. But he wasn't okay. And he didn't come back home. And being in the middle of lockdown, there was no face-to-face with anybody. I couldn't see the bereavement counselors. I had a phone call to check on how I was doing, and telephone numbers to call on people. I couldn't get his death certificate. I had to apply for it. I couldn't have family come to see me because they were not in my bubble at that point in time. So suffering that kind of loss and then being on my own, it really, really affected me because I was detached from the outside world to start with. And I just found it really hard. I got phone calls from a lot of people, but talking to people was very difficult. Sorry. This was my first marriage and my husband's second marriage. And sorry, there's background noise, so I'm struggling. Hello, can you hear me?
Please go ahead. We can hear
sorry,
you.
there was background noise, so it was
please just kindly ignore. Kindly ignore for now.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I was saying that it was my husband's second marriage. So he had a family on the other side. And for me, it was just me and him. So when he died, that's the time I kind of realized that he'd gone and done his will in favor of his daughter. So on the event of his death, I have that thrown at me again after it had just been the two of us, like, okay, how do we go about the funeral arrangements and things like that? And then to have the daughter turn up and say, I'm going to bury my father. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And I'm the executor of his will. And then I was kind of lost all over again. Because all those things hadn't been prepared for and hadn't been put into place. And once again, I found myself lost again. And my grieving has been really, really hard because I've had to do this on my own. And coming from a place or say a culture of where we don't talk about our mental health. I mean, I come from Zimbabwe and it's a very African thing to suppress our feelings. So I was kind of treated as a person who is taking too long to grieve. Usually when a death occurs, because we tend to come in groups. People do it within the week, they support each other, and then life goes on. But I was on my own, I was dealing with things differently, and it was like, it's time to move on. You're taking too long to grieve. But I don't think there's a timeline on anybody's grief. It's very personal. You know, when you lose a loved one, it doesn't matter if you're big, if you're small, if you're young, if you're old, if you're religious. Something happens to you. You have lost somebody very important in your life that was part of your life. So for me to get a handbook and say, how long does it take to grieve? It's not going to work for anybody. Yes, it's advice that can help you going forward, but it's not, there's no manual to how you can grieve. It's so personal. You know, there's days you wake up and you feel like you've accepted that you're on your own and you can do things. And then there are days that hit you so hard. You know, then you wonder, how am I going to do this? Why did you go? You know, why do I have to do this on my own? Why me? Kind of questions. And that's very, very hard. You know, I've struggled with my mental health over time, and it's another difficult thing to talk about, you know, amongst our people. And so people tend to end up shutting themselves in, which I've done, and you tend to end up using methods of coping that are sometimes not good. Well, for instance, I comfort eat because I stay on my own and I eat what I want whenever. It's not like, oh, it's dinner time now or it's lunchtime. I can wake up in the morning and not eat until 4 o'clock. And then I think, oh, I'll have whatever I want. And to a point where I've put on weight, and then I bump into people and they're like, what's happened to you? You know? And they know what's happened, but it's like accusing me of, you've let yourself go. You don't have to put on weight. You don't have to look like this.
Jennifer, can you mute yourself, please?
I'm sorry, can we mute, please? Everybody mute, please. Everybody but the speaker, please mute. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So my weight gain has become a greeting. You know, instead of people asking me, how are you? How are you coping? It's like, what's wrong with you? How come you're so big? You know, and there's so much I'm dealing with without even trying to think of how big I am. I'm not going to say that my weight doesn't affect me. It does, but I know what's caused it and I'm working on the problem. But, you know, it's as though I am lingering in that grief period for way too long. And I just want to urge people to we need to support each other. We need to be passionate and compassionate, you know. As a woman who is now newly available, I've had a lot of men come into my inbox, you know, and trying to chat me up and like, look, this is where I am in my life. I've lost a partner and I would like to grieve. But it's like, oh, you got to leave your life at some point. You're not the one who's dead. I just don't think it should be like that. I need to be allowed my time to grieve, my time to process, and to do the things that I need to do to go forward. Because if I'm doing it on someone else's timeline, then I'm not doing it for myself. It is going to come back and affect me inside. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for listening. I mean, I could go on, but I don't really want to. Thank you for having, you know, this platform, and I hope as we go along, we can be actually there to support each other and to support the other widows, and not only to support other widows, but other people who have lost loved ones in their families and they cannot get help for it. So thank you. I'm Zandi Hamilton and I'm done speaking.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, whoever you're dialing from. How do I even speak after Zandi? Wow. Thank you so much for sharing your story, your journey. I was meant to be speaking from the perspective of a child, but I wanted to echo what Zandi said, that there is no timeline for bereavement, really. Each and every one of us experience grief in different ways, and our reactions or our coping mechanisms differ. It's been decades since I had my initial loss, and I still, every now and then, have those feelings. I have triggers. You know, recently I had very close relatives pass away, and it just brought back those emotions I felt when I lost my parents. So let me take you back a bit and share some of my journey with you. I was 6 years old when my dad passed away, but I still had my mom, and I was actually closer to my mom because my dad used to travel a lot. So for me, yes, my dad was gone, but my mom was still there. And so for me, I was very grateful for that. I still had a good relationship with her. However, it was painful to see the grief that she was going through. She really struggled. There was a lot that she was juggling and trying to come to terms with. My dad's death was very sudden. We had just buried my granddad, and so within a few days of burying my granddad, I'm not even sure if it was up to a couple of days, and my dad passed away suddenly. So there was no illness at the time. He slept and he didn't wake up. So it was a total shock to all of us. But I was 6. I didn't really understand grief or bereavement. I only saw it from the view of my mom, and that she was struggling. She really struggled. She became a shadow of herself. And I remember waking up one morning and saying to her, you know, you can marry somebody else. For me, I just felt like she needed another man. And she just smiled at me. Anyway, fast forward 5 years later, my mom then passed away again suddenly. I was in boarding school at the time, and I think I was back home. Maybe this was the second week of my summer holidays, and she fell ill. She was taken to hospital. I don't even recall all the details. I knew she was taken from one hospital to another hospital, and then suddenly she was gone. Wow. I felt like my entire world came crashing down. I'd never even heard of people losing their parents at that time. So for me, it's like, what had I done wrong? What did I do to deserve this? I was just like, gosh, somebody up there must really, really hate me for this to happen to me. Okay. Sorry, I'll turn up my volume. So yeah, I felt like, what was going on? And I used to live in Nigeria at the time, and I'd watched so many Nollywood movies, and I was already playing in my mind what I thought was going to happen. Who was going to start looking after me? Where was I going to go? In fact, when the news was broken to me, the first thing I said was, who is going to look after me now? I am the youngest of 5 children, and most of my siblings were living in the UK at the time, so it was just my immediate brother that was in Nigeria, and he's 6 years older than me. So I'm like, he's not going to look after me, so who is going to look after me at this time? I was so disturbed. It completely changed my world. In fact, a couple of days ago, I was looking at some pictures, and I can tell you that event changed my persona as a child. I was very bubbly, very outgoing, very smiley, cheerful. And then I just kind of changed into this moody person. I couldn't really express myself. I didn't know whether it was okay for me to enjoy life. I didn't know what I was meant to do. I couldn't really talk about my mom because people around me weren't talking about her. So I didn't know whether if I talked about her, I would get them upset, or what was I supposed to do? It was really challenging for me. So I stayed in Nigeria for a couple more years, and then I moved to the UK. And they always say that loss, it's more than just losing that person. Yes, the primary loss is the person, but there's secondary loss linked to that initial loss. So for me, it was losing now my community, the people that I was close to in Nigeria. When I was in Nigeria, I had family members that used to live with us, distant uncles and aunties and cousins. And so I was now leaving all these people behind, coming to start a new life, starting a new school. So this is this African girl coming to the UK with a different accent, having to settle in. I was, how can I put this? I had different views about the UK. So for example, I used to wear trousers. I was like, I'm not going to wear skirt. The first winter hit me, and I knew that I was going to start wearing trousers. So there's so many culture shock, and it took me a while to settle. Fast forward, I don't even know how many years down the line, I was watching a program on TV, and at the end of that program, they mentioned a bereavement charity. And I thought, wow, bereavement charity, there's something like that. So I reached out to the founder. I started volunteering because I just wanted to give back and use my experience to help others. So what I want to share with you today is the things that I have found have been helpful in my journey so far. I feel like in our culture, and when I say our culture, I'm really talking about African culture, we tend to shy away from this topic. We feel like, okay, life has happened, this person is gone, we just have to get on with life. But getting on with life isn't so easy. As I said, this is decades down the line. A couple of months ago, I was brushing my son's teeth, and as we were in the bathroom, I thought, wow, look at you, you're such a handsome boy. I wish your grandma got to meet you. And I just started crying. And the boy was looking at me like, what's causing mommy to cry when she's brushing my teeth? He couldn't understand why. So what I'm saying to everyone here is bereavement isn't just a one-off thing that happens in your life. There'll be triggers along the line, and you do need that support from your community, from people around you to just help you move forward. So there are a few things that I found have been helpful that I want to share. One crucial one has been having mentors around me. Gosh, I can't thank my sisters, friends, big aunts and uncles, just being there for me. We don't necessarily talk about my mom or my dad, but they're there that I can reach out to and talk about challenges in my life. So yes, my mom and dad might not be around, but I have these people that I could reach out to for support. So if you're a widow on the call, I strongly recommend that you find somebody, be it in your neighborhood, be it at work, be it in your church, find someone that your child can connect with. Because the truth of the matter is they might not even want to speak to you. I'll tell you that for decades, okay, my siblings and I couldn't be talking about it. It's only recently that we're comfortable talking about, my parents. So your children might not feel confident enough to talk to people within your immediate circle, but if you can find somebody else that you trust and they're comfortable to share their fears, that would be so helpful. The other one that I found in the UK, this isn't available, I would say in Nigeria as much as it is in the UK, is having a community of children that have the same experience, so bringing them together. In the UK, there's so many children movements and services that just bring these people together. It's good for them to know that they're not alone. Because for me, I was like, is this just me? Why would this happen to me? But knowing that you're not alone in this journey, if you can think about what you're going through as an adult, then imagine your children as well. In their classroom, they might be the only one that this is happening to. But if they're able to connect with a group, it just helps them to understand that, the others going through similar things. One of the charities that I work with, we have like Mother's Day and Father's Day events, so that the children know that yes, at school they might have done craft for Mother's Day and they didn't have anyone to be that, but they can come together with other children who have lost their mom or their dad and kind of share their emotions. So please find such support groups to help you. Talking helps. Now, I found that some children find it easy to talk, some don't. Just give them time. It took me years to start opening up. I just don't want to. What would I even say? Where would I start? Do you even understand what I've gone through? Don't even bring it up. But over time, I found my own voice and I started to speak again. So give children time, allow them that space when they want. There'll be others that are eager to talk. So if they want to, please encourage them to talk about it. Journaling. So my sisters, gosh, they knew that I wasn't speaking. They knew there was a lot going on inside. So they used to buy me diaries and kind of just write down my thoughts. And that was very helpful. At times you might not even want to write. You just want to draw what's going on in your imagination. I found children that wouldn't say a word, but they would draw something and you can just read so much from what they've done. It might be that they miss their dad carrying them, or they miss their mom cooking a special meal. You can tell a lot from what they have right now, not just in terms of words, but what they draw on paper. So encourage your children to journal and to write. And this one is something that again Africans will shy away from. There is nothing wrong with getting a counselor. So please reach out to get counseling. Some children don't like to see counselors within the school because they have to take it out of classrooms to go and see a counselor. And they don't want their friends saying, why were you taken out? What is going on? So they might want to do those counseling at school, but it's important that you get a counselor, especially if you find that your child has withdrawn completely or there are certain reactions that you feel, okay, I need external support here. So please reach out. And some children would regress. I'm okay to share this. And I've gone past my shyness and this. I started bedwetting after my mom passed away because I was so scared of getting up at night. I used to have nightmares about my mom and I just didn't want, I was in boarding school and I didn't want to get out of my bed to go to the toilet. So I started regressing. Again, if you find this happening, please get support. Don't just cover things up and assume that over time you'll get better. Please get support. One of my favorite ones is keeping memories alive. Please keep the memories of your loved ones alive. Don't try and shut this person out of the lives of the children. So be it birthdays, be it anniversaries, do something to remember these people. Have pictures of them around the house. It might be challenging initially. So I remember there was a man that for the first 6 weeks, I think, he took out all the pictures of his wife away from the home because he couldn't bear looking at the pictures. But then over time, he broke that. So I think it's important for the children to know that you haven't cut off this person from their lives. They might not be here physically, but they're still a part of their life. So please keep memories alive share stories with the children. Tell them about when you looked their mom or their dad, what happened there. It's so important. Even now, as an adult, when people tell me what my mom did for them, what my dad did, it just gives me so much joy. And like, oh wow, thank you for sharing that. So I think that one more minute to say that bereavement support is ongoing. It never ends. So please, those initial months or few weeks, everybody is around, bringing food, calling, texting, and then after a while, the thing finds out. Please do not stop your support. Reach out every now and then. If it's Father's Day, Mother's Day, offer to take them out for a meal, offer to do something for them. If a widow has so many friends struggling with this children, offer to take them out for a weekend, or just do whatever you can, but it's not a one-off support. Thank you so much, Auntie Balaki, for having me. It's great honor to be on the spot.
Thank you very much, madam. Good afternoon from Nigeria. Hello.
Hello, we can hear you,
madam.
Okay, good afternoon, madam. Good afternoon. I want to stand on existing protocols. My name is Omobolanle Olatunde. I have been asked by my chairman, CEO of the Nigerians that are in Diaspora Commission to represent her this afternoon during the launch of this very wonderful initiative of the African Wonder Women in Diaspora. She has asked me to specially commend the convener of this NGO in person of our dear, beautiful mama. She has asked me to commend you specially for your efforts and for the wonderful work that you are doing. I will just quickly, she gave me a very short address to present to you, so you permit me to go through it briefly, and then we can take questions if need be. Widowhood in African society comes with very debilitating effects on women, with such practices that are oppressive and humiliating upon the demise of their husbands and loved ones. It is sad that the African woman suffers stressful situations when the husband dies, such that she suffers a lot of emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual problems. Many African widows do not enjoy the best of health after the passing of their husbands due to pressure of conforming to widowhood practice. The African Wonder Women Initiative by Princess Folaji Fasonya Omoyeni is thus a good step in the right direction and also very timely too. African widows in diaspora may enjoy institutional support, but then they are not extricated from the trauma associated with widowhood in the African society. Just like their local counterparts, they suffer oppressive and humiliating practices as well as sanctions placed on them to make it difficult for them to express their viewpoint in widowhood. The Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, through the National Diaspora Policy, aims to provide a comprehensive and supporting framework for facilitating diaspora engagement in national development by empowering the diaspora to contribute effectively and maximizing the value of diaspora contributions to Nigeria's development, and also from our end here, do all that is humanly possible to give support to the diaspora, particularly in this case, the African women in diaspora. We must therefore continually engage our African widows in diaspora in existing and emerging African projects and participation. Doing this will be mutually beneficial to the widows as well as their host and destination countries. First, African communities must nourish and not starve widows and their children. The right of inheritance should equally be geared to the widow and her children. And the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission is working closely with the National Assembly and the Presidency to ensure that the proper bill is put in place and signed into law to ensure this. I want to assure you this afternoon that we're in this together. We're concerned one way or the other, and thus must join forces from every sphere of the society to eradicate the harmful practices on widows through reorientation and re-education campaign for women. The Nigerians in Diaspora Commission and Nigeria's Ministry of Women Affairs will therefore collaborate towards ensuring that a bill criminalizing abuse of African widows is sponsored and passed into law by the National Assembly. This will strengthen grieving women and renew their sense of belonging, even as they grapple with the situation fate has brought them. African widows in diaspora will be empowered and will be recognized. And of course, their role in the socioeconomic development of their African countries of origin shall be promoted. Henceforth, we must mobilize the professional, social, and financial resources of all our African widows in diaspora who are interested in promoting development projects in their countries of origin, particularly through entrepreneurial activities that generate jobs, with the support, partnership, and co-funding of various interested associations and their host communities. Relevant government agencies will be positioned and will be ready to fully assist our women from time to time. The value of African widows' remittances would also be enhanced by working with financial and banking institutions in their countries of origin so as to reduce money transfer fees, create new financial products, and promote the use of savings for productive investments and social initiatives. A whole department is in charge of coordinating such within the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission. And it will be of great value to us and to our African widows in diaspora if we can harness every available opportunity and link with this department within the NIDCOM to ensure a free flow of information, and at the end of the day to ensure that African widows in diaspora live better lives and participate actively in projects even within the African continent. I want to thank you very much for this opportunity given me to be part of this initiative, and I thank you for listening. Thank you.
Wow. I lost my husband about 2.5 years ago, suddenly. He had fallen ill on a family holiday, and never did I think in a million years that it would have resulted in his passing. He was just sat there having lunch with myself, our daughter, and my goddaughter, who happened to be his niece. And he just said, I feel a bit funny. But in my spirit, I knew something was wrong, because I'm one of these people that I act now and complain later. So as I got up from the table, I said, let me call the doctor in London. We were on holiday in Portugal. I said, let me call the doctor in London and let me see, what advice he can give us. And as I got up to walk away, I just saw the tears just streaming down my face. And I knew it was bad. So after a few hours, we were able to get back home because we had a driver that had dropped us to the beach where we were. So we couldn't it wasn't like England that you can just get on public transport and just, get to wherever you need to go to. So eventually we got home. I said, okay, you wait, I'll go across the road. God's so good. There was a clinic literally just across the road from the apartment. And I got there, and that's when I kind of panicked. And I said, look, my husband is not well. He says he's not feeling too good. His face has kind of dropped. So, what can I do? And they said, look, don't worry, we're about to close, but we'll wait for him. Bring him over. This is how much you have to pay. Obviously, it wasn't NHS, so I had to pay for the consultation. And then just go and get him and we'll see him. Took my husband to see the doctor, and he said, you're having a stroke. Have you been under any stress lately? And the usual questions. So we go to the hospital and they confirm that it's a stroke. Only to find the following day, after some massage and what have you, his face began to take its normal shape. They did the MRI scan and they said, actually, no, it's not a stroke, but we don't know what it is at this point. So 2 days later, I've obviously I had to leave the girls and be making this trip to the hospital, which was quite some distance away from where we were staying. And I get a call from my husband saying, look, you have to come to the hospital because they won't speak to me unless you're here. So I go to the hospital and I met with a neurologist, a neurosurgeon, and a doctor. And they asked me, did your husband walk into this hospital? And I said, well, yes, my husband's 6'2". I think I'd know if I was carrying him on my back. And they asked me again, and I said, yes, he walked in himself. They said, okay, well, here's the deal. Your husband has got a compression on his spinal cord. Any sudden movement, he will either be paralyzed from the neck down, or a blood clot to the brain would kill him. So we have to do an immediate, operation. We need your consent. Well, obviously there wasn't much of a choice in the matter because, neither options was really an option. So he had the operation and everything was fine until 2 days later, where he develops a infection in the wound and all hell breaks loose. My husband, 6'2" strapping Mandingo man, goes from being that to me having to brush his teeth, being in intense pain. We end up staying in Portugal for 3 months. That's how bad things got. And then we were airlifted to a hospital I'm sure many of you will know North Middlesex Hospital. And that was the beginning of a 3.5-year journey. And my story is such that towards the end of that 3.5-year journey, I thought that was the end of the journey for good reason. I wake up one morning on the 21st of January. I wake up the Monday morning and I hear my husband call for me. I come downstairs. He asked me to pray with him. He's not feeling well. I pray with him. He asked me to lay on his chest, which I do. Again, this time the feeling was different. I called the ambulance. I said, my husband is dying. In that whole time, I had never used those words. My husband is dying. Those words had never come from my mouth. Within 2.5 hours, and if I'm really honest, within an hour, I was widowed, just like that. My experience within 24 hours of losing my husband was what I have come to find, unfortunately, to be the story of many African women. Forget the fact that you're in the diaspora. You can take the woman out of Africa, but you can't take Africa out of the woman or the men. And within 24 hours, there I was being accused of being disrespectful to the family just because I wasn't available to pick up the phone, as if I'm going to say, oh, hi, oh, you're calling to find out whether my husband's dead. Oh, thanks for the call. Who does that? I was in an absolute daze, not being able to fathom that this had really happened to me. But very quickly, the realization that I needed to be my own advocate was something that hit me pretty pronto. And I had a choice in that moment, or in the moment following my husband's passing, that I could either be a victim or stand up and make sure that my voice was heard. Now, I'm originally from Ghana. Well, technically, I have done a genetic DNA test, and I am probably more Yoruba than I am anything, but that's another story for another day. But in our culture, when a woman loses her husband, she's not allowed to speak. You have somebody that will basically be the spokesperson who comes in, sits down, and the people that come in, obviously, I think it's quite similar in other traditions. You come with money, you come with water or whatever drink, so that people who come to grieve with you have something to sustain them whilst they're there. So I'm sat there, and everybody comes in, and each time somebody comes, the story of how my husband died must be recounted. So it goes something like this, and obviously I'll say it in English so you understand. I heard something that was very troubling, and I didn't want to believe it. And so therefore I'm asking you what happened. And I would have to sit there and listen to my greatest nightmare being repeated over and over and over and over again. Each time losing a piece of my sanity as I am being forced to face reality. The family then decide that they're not going to be supportive. Obviously, they had shown that from within a day or so of my husband's passing. And I was very much on my own in that regard. Because culturally, and I think the Ghanaian culture, the Nigerian culture, I think is quite similar, because the body of the deceased belongs to the family. Whereas my husband was from Sierra Leone, so the body belongs to the wife. Therefore, the wife is the one who dictates what happens in regards to the burial of the husband, which was my only saving grace. So I was able to at least keep some of the control for myself. Now, the reason why I am sharing this backstory and, being asked to speak about being widowed young and then living your life or reinventing yourself so that you can live is important to share, because that process or that period from when you lose your husband to whenever is where the most damage and the biggest change in your personality, your outlook on life, you even questioning who you are as a woman, that's when it takes place. And there were many emotions that I felt, because as I mentioned, when we have the 7-day sit down, what we have is having to wear the traditional clothing, where you have to wear black for really a period of a year. And I remember when I saw that black kaftan laid out on the bed, not only was it when reality hit, but I felt ashamed. I can never to this day explain why I felt ashamed that I'd lost my husband, but I also felt incredibly naked. I felt that my covering had been removed. I felt like I had been stripped, naked and being asked to parade the streets. I felt that I was now available for anybody and anything to attack me, and I could not defend myself. So when I look at what the Lord has done for me and how I am now able to stand in my power and in my purpose, has only come about because I had my why answered. Why did I lose my husband? Why me? And if you're very religious, you will never dare to question God, because it is well. In fact, I banned every living being from telling me it is well. I said, there is nothing well about a woman burying her husband at 47 with 2 children. What is well in that? And I think where I was able to begin to look at the new Dilys was when my why was answered, when I realized that the loss of my husband was for the benefit of somebody else, for the woman who was going to lose her husband after me, because God's grace being sufficient for me and him knowing that this daughter of mine can handle it. And so therefore, my grace is sufficient for her. And once she stands up on her own 2 feet, she will pass that baton on to the next woman. And that is how I can look at my experience and appreciate where I am in this time, knowing that it wasn't for nothing. I wrote my best-selling book, Not This Widow, because of my husband, because somebody had to die in order for me to live, in order for life to be seen through me for a time such as this. When Princess lost her husband, I was able to reach out and connect with her on a completely different level. There are times where you're speaking to another woman who has had that experience and you don't even need to speak. And so what I would say in closing, that my experience, because I realized the reason for it, my mourning journey was with a different slant to it. Painful, yes. Never ending, yes. devastatingly crippling at this stage? No, because I've understood its purpose. I've understood where people would draw from my experience and be able to help them on their journey. I have ensured that my grieving journey was not going to be dictated to spiritually. I was not going to do it the Christian way. I wasn't going to do it the cultural way, the traditional way, society's way. I was doing it my way. And because I was doing it my way, I was in control of it. After 4 months, I threw off the black cloth. I thought, this thing is affecting my mental health. I ain't doing it anymore. I decided I was going to wear makeup and fix my hair and put on my high heels and wear my jeans and do what I wanted to do. I wasn't going to allow, just because as widows we are accused of killing our husbands, and no, I was not an exception to that rule, that for that reason I would allow anybody to have control over who I was. Because as that song says, I know who God says I am. You don't have the privilege to be able to define me. Only myself and God have that power to do that. And when I got into that mindset, I was able to walk this journey and make decisions for myself as a grown woman, even in terms of when I decide I would want to date again, if I so wished. Because when you're widowed, you are not allowed to make any decisions for yourself. And as I say to people, I lost my husband, not my mind, not my voice. So I have lived my life after my husband passed away, exactly that, my life. You who will go home to lay beside your husband, or you who will go home to lay beside your wife, I do not give you the permission nor the power to tell me how to live my life when I'm sleeping alone. So I think what I would like for other widows to take stock of is that we have to band together to ensure that society, culture, tradition does not tell us who we are. I was told that my husband's family would have to come and wash me after 40 days. I said, I would love to see them try. I said, let me see who is a woman among you that will remove my clothing and wash my body. It's never going to happen. When I decide I want to date, it will be my choice. When I decide I want to discard these black clothes that I am being forced because of culture to wear for a year, that is affecting my mental health to the point where when I sleep, apparently, I am shaking in my sleep. No more. No more. I lost a husband, not my mind. I have the right to live. Because when we talk about life after death, it's not just the afterlife from earth to heaven, but it's the afterlife of burying a husband, making sure that you, especially if you are a Christian, that you don't tell God that my whole destiny was tied up in my husband so that when he died, I died too. That is for you to continue the journey of walking in your purpose and in your power and fulfilling your destiny. Where is it written that our husbands and I will, we and our husbands will grow old together? Where is it written? Where is it written? We fulfill our life's purpose by fulfilling our destiny. If Jesus had died an old man, it means he didn't fulfill his destiny. So for as long as we know and understand what our purpose is, we will be able to do this thing called life after we become bereaved. So thank you very much for having me. And
fruit bearers of a nation. So also in the diaspora, a lot has happened when it comes to moving from our country of origin to another country where we're seeking opportunities. A lot has happened. And I place my heart on my chest. I place my hands on my chest today because I got scars on my hands, as everyone can see that, because my heart goes out to the women and also much more to the widows because they've been through pain. We might not have, you may not have physical scars, but the pain that I know that you may have been through is possibly deeper, it's emotional and mental pain. So my heart goes out to you. My heart goes out to everyone, all the widows. My heart goes out to you, and that's why I place my hand on my heart. My heart goes out to you. So I've been told to share from trauma to triumph. From trauma to triumph. When we're talking about trauma, what does it look like? I'm gonna share my story very briefly. At the age of 3, my mom came to England, left me alone in Nigeria. And for everyone that studied extensively on attachment issue, we know that when you're separated from your primary carers, you're likely to experience some trauma if you leave your child at a critical age. From 0 to 5 is a critical age to leave any, like your children, or become separated from them. So I started experiencing trauma from the age of 3. At the age of 14, I got to this country. I finally started living with my mom. I moved to England, and then another trauma kicked in. I had an accident. It was a house fire accident, which was like the Grenfell Tower sort of fire accident. I was shouting in the fire. It was burning. And I was asking for help. The neighbor woke up and told me to stay there because they feel that the ambulance are coming. Like, stay there, stay in the house. We're coming to get you. And what then happened was I couldn't bear the heat no more, the fire no more. I couldn't bear it. I thought I was gonna die in the fire. What I did was I broke the double glazing window, the glass, with my hand. And I jumped out from 3rd floor down to the ground floor. The ambulance came, they took me to the hospital. I spent 6 months at Chelmsford Hospital. And I thought that was the end of a traumatic event, but it was just the beginning, facing life, facing reality, that my life would never remain the same again. That was a very traumatic experience for me at an age where everyone feels that, you know, most children, most teenagers, they care a lot about their looks. Having sustained 35% burns on my body, I felt I lost part of me. I lost part of my existence. Because if you lose your skin and you have scars hands or scar neck, you feel that you've lost part of you, and you also grieve, just like many widows would. Grief about their husband. I grieved for so many years, asking the same question: why me? Should I have left Nigeria? Why did this happen to me? It was a question I asked for several times, for many, many years. Why me? Why did this happen to me? And in a state of trauma, you will also find that it becomes a problematic or a problem to actually regulate your emotions. Okay, sometimes you're happy, sometimes your mood just change. This is what you experience when you've experienced trauma. Your mood can change anytime because of what had happened. For many years, I didn't understand, and even to some extent, my siblings that could understand that, they felt, well, it's very weird amongst us, it's strange, we don't understand him. That's part of the trauma. Trauma affects your behavior. It affects you, your acceptance of yourself, because that's part of the whole process.
Sorry, doctor, just giving you your 2-minute warning. 2-minute warning. Thank you.
All right. So that's what trauma looks like. Trauma is something that impacts on your emotions and your behavior. Then, of course, to transform that into triumph. A triumph is a state of a state of fulfillment, a state where you want to start making a difference in people's lives. And the thing about pain is very attractive. You get to connect more with people that have been through similar experiences. And when you to say that, there's a calling telling you that attracts people as a state where you know that triumph is right here, is getting there, a life of purpose. That's what it means to triumph, to move from trauma into triumph is to start living a life of purpose, start reaching out. For example, myself, I help people living with scars right now. People living with physical that lost their self-identity or self-image or self-esteem. I help them to boost their self-confidence. That's what I do. Every day I meet people that have been through trauma. I'm also a social worker, so I get connected more with people that have been through pain, that have been through trauma. Dilly, the previous speaker, she had written a book, Not This Widow. That to me is living a life of purpose, because she stood from within and said, not me. So if you've been through trauma, to triumph from it, write your experiences down, turn it into a book. There are millions of people like yourself out there that will need to hear your stories. Okay, when you start to write a book about your experiences,
thank you.
All right, thank you. So that is what that means, living a life of purpose. Thirdly, you've got to look after you. Self-care is very important. Having a support network, developing a support network. What Princess is doing today, she is obviously want to use her pain, turn it into a program so that she can collaborate with other people. So the same way it is to live a triumphant life, you cannot live in isolation. You need to collaborate, work together, and live a triumphant life. Thank you, everyone, and God bless.
Can I just say thank you for inviting me to be here today? And I'm hoping to get through this slide quite quickly. If you do have questions or any issues, I've left my details in the chat, and they're also at the end of this slide, so feel free to contact me should you need to. On the next slide, you'll see that the contents of the presentation.
Is it possible for you to shut the door where you are? I think somebody's vacuuming and we can hear the noise in the background. To shut the door, please. Thank you.
Okay.
That's better.
So, next slide, please.
There's still that humming noise in the back.
Okay, I think the noise might be from my device. So what I might have to do is, let's see. I think it's in the device.
Okay.
Okay, so the contents of the slides are basically going through wills, power of attorney, business succession and inheritance planning, and how you can try to reduce the tax burden. In the UK, unfortunately, the inheritance tax is 40%, and this is just a light run through. With inheritance and with bereavement, there can be a large number of issues, from applying for your letters of administration, which is what you must do if somebody has passed away, even securing a death certificate if there's not been the possibility of getting a certificate of death in the UK. Maybe if the person dies abroad in odd circumstances, that might be delayed. But whatever your situation might be, because I've been in practice a long time, there's nothing that I really haven't seen. So next slide, please. All right, so drafting wills. Unfortunately, we don't like to talk about death in our community. Lots of people will find it morbid. So sadly, we don't get to talk about death until oddly it's too late. But the one thing you must take away from this event today is to make sure that you draft your will. It is imperative that you do so. Otherwise, what is likely to happen is that your estate will sadly suffer the largest level of tax possible, and also your wishes and intentions may not be passed on as you might want. And further, if you have dependents, they may not be looked after. So putting a will in place makes it easier for family to administer your estate, and then it also makes sure that you have your assets dispersed as you want. And then again, if you have dependents like children or elderly relatives, you can name who you want to look after them. You wouldn't want anybody falling into the hands of social care, or for there to be any difficulties with them accessing the things that they need to sustain themselves. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Right, so if you already have a will, the other thing that you have to do is make sure that it is maintained and up to date. It's important that life-changing events, or if there's change in the dynamics of your estate, that you keep it up to date. Some people say you can't change wills, but you can. You can add codicils on. So again, a lot of lack of information, a big lack of estate planning within our community. And so knowledge is power. And power is revenue to those that you're leaving behind, and it gives power to your legacy. So do try and get informed about these things. So again, if you have changes to your life situation, if there are additional children, again, if there's a loss or change to your assets, change your will as it's needed. Try to keep your instructions with one person, try to keep your document with one person, and then note that failing to keep it up to date may make it inoperable. So do get advice around it. Next slide, please. Okay, power of attorney. One of the things that we have to discuss again is power of attorney, not just for whether you're ill, but whether you want things done on your behalf in another jurisdiction. So what does it do? What happens if I have one? Next, please. So there's different types of power of attorney, okay? And I mentioned this because sometimes people have debilitating illnesses, things that reduce their welfare and their physical and mental ability. Degenerative illnesses also can cause or have the need for this type of a document. And there's an ordinary power of attorney. That's something that you might draft and allow somebody power to exercise a particular function on your behalf, or a particular activity, such as selling a house in Portugal, or it may be for you to take money out of a post office account because you're bedridden. But you see, that is not one that is ordinarily recognized in law. If you became ill and I went to the hospital showing that one, the doctors would not listen to what I have to say. There's two different types. The next one is the lasting power of attorney. That's the one that needs to be registered, and you register that one with the courts. And that is the most common and the correct way to do a power of attorney for somebody who has lack of capacity, whether due to the debilitating illness, physical disability, or maybe it's an adult child who has a learning disability or illness that makes them unable to carry out their functions for themselves. But the lasting power of attorney is the best way to register your document. An enduring power of attorney is no longer in existence, but they stopped in 2007, so you still find some of them floating around. So we just mention it in case it's something that you see one of your relatives may have provided and not really known how to go about making sure it's up to date and in line with the new law. Next, please. Right, so lasting power of attorneys. In addition to planning your will, if you are having a debilitating illness or you're losing capacity, you must do one of these. Again, do not leave it too late. If women in the UK, one of the common situations we have is somebody who may, for example, has cancer and they're praying for it to disappear, praying for healing, but not really looking after in the eventualities and putting things like this in place. And sadly, when it's too late now, it becomes an issue. So if you have a debilitating diagnosis, you start to put these things in place. Don't let it become that you are incapacitated and trying to get it justified or validated. These documents must be put in place as early as possible. Next, please. So the lasting power of attorney will enable somebody to have power over your finances, your health decisions. This can be included with your banks. It can be lodged with your bank's copies, post office, even with your financial advisors and accountants. Not appointing a power of attorney means that other people will have to go through that cost of applying to court to get the power to assist you in managing your affairs. And it may even lead to the government appointing somebody as a special advocate for you. And that might be somebody whom you don't even know, somebody who has no idea of your values, your likes, dislikes. So you want to save people the time and expense of having these hurdles should you become incapacitated or pass away. Next, please. Now, again, when it comes down to these lasting power of attorneys, you can distinguish between health and healthcare decisions. So these are like end-of-life decisions. Most recently, I also suffered a bereavement. My mum passed away, and one of the things that the doctors were asking us is about do not resuscitate orders. And we had to make that decision in advising the doctors whether we agreed to their do not resuscitate being put there. If you are not...
Jennifer, your 2-minute warning. Thank you very much.
So if you don't put something like this in place for somebody who knows your standards, a decision might be made such as that on your behalf. Again, if there's a separate one for financial decisions. And again, buying and selling property, as I've mentioned. Next, please. Succession planning. Really, if you are in business or you own a company or you have a family business, it's important that you make provision again for succession planning. What happens if you're incapacitated tomorrow? What happens to the business? All the things that you've built up. It's crucial to make sure that you do this. And this might be dealing with shares, outlining what happens, who becomes a manager in your business, who within the family, if it's a family business, goes into seat as the chairperson or director. Next, please. It's really important that you have these agreements in place, even covering shares within the company, so that there is clear steps as to continuity for that business. And in the event of death, shareholders' agreements are clear ways of outlining who should have power, what should happen to specific roles and obligations belonging to you or any other person who has authority within the business. Next, please. Family succession planning is something we do here because we're a specialist family practice. We own a lot of accreditations with regards to that, as well as practice excellence. So we are specialists in dealing with this type of matter. Next, please. Inheritance tax planning. I'll quickly go through this slide. If you go on to the next slide, please. Quite frankly, anything that you own over 325,000 is subject to a 40% tax in the UK. That is why it's important that you take advice early, whether you give gifts, whether you bestow property, so that 6 years after you've passed away, it means that there'll be no tax, whether you set up trust funds, whether you create pensions for your children, all so that you make sure you reduce your tax burden, and you make sure that you get that advice from a financial advisor, a qualified person, not somebody you met in the mosque or the church, but somebody who is qualified and has specific training and experience. Experience also comes with qualification. Next, please. So there is the ability to give lifetime gifts. Again, making sure you set this out. And these gifts can also reduce the liability of inheritance tax, even if you die within the 6 years of or 7 years of bestowing that gift. So very, very important that you sit down and do this planning early and do it well. Next, please. Trust is one of the best ways that you can actually protect and minimize your tax burden. We set up a lot of trust for some very organized families. It's very important that you're all on the same page as a family if you're doing something like this as well. And it's an effective way to protect not just your children, but even your grandchildren. Next, please. Okay, discounted gifts trust. Again, it's a way that if you give out a gift from your estate, it can reduce the tax liability even to the trust, even if you pass away early. So very, very important and very, I would say, a clever way to avoid tax and a very good way to secure and ring fence your legacy for your children and grandchildren. Next, please. So there's different ways that you can save the tax, depending on your individual family circumstance, whether you create pensions for your children. And I know that Cedric's coming on later and he's a wizard with finances, but you basically get that advice, whether it's pensions, whether it's gifts, whether it's property, whether it's trusts. Do plan. Do not leave it too late. Don't think that you've got nothing to give. Everybody has something to give. Next, please. So how can we help you? What advice we can give? This organization that Princess Folaji has set up, it was a place that you could come to for expert advice, a place you can come to for comfort, a place you can come to for any type of support that you need or anybody you know may need. So please, please, thank you for listening, but please, please make sure you pass on the information that you've heard today. Let people know that there is now a place that they can go to where they'll get the particular help that they may need. And as I've said, if you do need help, I've left my address, email number in the chat, and you can always get me through Princess anyway. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Yes, it is a she, it is a her. I think I have the male name. It's Ekindotu, and it's everybody always thinks it's a guy, but that works for me in my favor sometimes. So I'm glad to be here. I celebrate you, Princess, for doing this. It's been amazing. And you know what? Your passion comes through, and I wish you all the success. All these women and men gathered around you it's actually just priceless. So just take a moment and just enjoy the journey. All right, so I do have a PowerPoint. I'm here for 20 minutes, and I'm going to share my PowerPoint with you.
I'm sorry, Doctor, if you just also kind of introduce yourself, so that we know why we have you as a keynote. Thank you.
Oh, I thought that was already, okay, all right. So I'm a professor of psychology. I'm a mental health commissioner here. I live in California. I have been in mental health for a few decades here. I also the president of JARS Education Group. I'm a mother of 4. I've been married forever. But my experience with, if you really want my detailed profile, please go and I'm sure they can give it to you. But I want to come on here. I've been dealing with trauma. I'm a trauma specialist. I have been since, especially because of the pandemic. I think every single day since 2020, I've been either on a radio, on a TV, on a group, talking about trauma, training on traumas. We do have trauma trainings that we've been conducting across the globe. Especially my experience with trauma was at the age of 12. I'm sure I had a few earlier than that, but my mom died when I was 12 years old. So for all the widows who were here and the widowers and who have experienced the loss of a spouse, there's also their children who are experiencing this loss along with you. And it took me forever. It's still a loss, but the way trauma works, and especially grief, is is that you have to go through the seasons. You have to go through the cycle of it. You have to have at least a year of Christmas, a year of spring together, a year of summer together, a year of whatever you've done that you do every year, all those traditions, you go through it. But when you lose a mother, and then when you start having children after all of those years, and then that loss comes right back again because your mom isn't there to help you. So there are all of these things that go into it. So for every one of us here today, you know, who are here, I salute us for being here. Some of the things that I'm going to say have probably been already alluded to, so I'm going to skip a few things, but I just have a few, let me set my timer so that I make sure that I don't go over, but I'm sure you'll remind me anyway, because I hear you saying that 20 minutes is 2 minutes and 2 minutes. All right, so that works for me, perfect, because I can talk. All right, so let's see, you can see my screen, I'm sure, because I can't see it. And I'm going to make it into a slide. So one of the things we know about grief, it's not linear. I like this particular image. Grief is not linear. It doesn't start strong and taper off with time. Rather, it's like a storm that grows smaller or larger in the same day and often within hours. So sometimes you're feeling okay, and sometimes the memories come flooding back. And so it's something that people will experience in their life. Grief is a type of trauma. And so trauma is a traumatic event that involves a single experience or something that is repetitive, which becomes complex, that completely overwhelms your ability to cope or integrate the ideas and emotions involving that experience. And loss is one of them, because when that happens to you, it's unexpected. Even when someone has been ill, that loss still seems unexpected. The victim is unprepared. You're unprepared for all the stuff that comes with it. And there's a sense of helplessness in that this is beyond your control. Like if you were God, you could literally say, look, I don't want this person to die. You know, in my younger days as a Christian, I used to think, you know, I grew up in the faith movement, and I used to think that, you know, I could just make everything happen like the way I want it to happen. And I just lost somebody very close to me, and you think that the sense of overwhelming of loss is there, that you can't control something. The more you grow up and you begin to experience this, and you know you're not God, you know that you're not omniscient, and you know that there's some things you don't have control over, and that shows you that, you know, it almost feels this sense of helplessness. So how do you describe grief? Some of you can articulate it so much better, but grief is the pain, the acute pain that accompanies a loss, because it's a reflection of how we love and what we love. It can be all encompassing. Grief is not limited to the loss of people. But today we're talking about loss of people, but it's not limited to that. Grief comes in every way. It could be a loss of a relationship, a loss of a job, a loss of status, a loss of physical abilities. It could be anything. When it follows the loss of a loved one, though, it is compounded by feelings of guilt, confusion, especially if you had a difficult relationship with the person who died. So if you lost a spouse, your husband died, and you guys were fighting, or there was a conflicted kind of relationship, then it's like, how do I process this? Some people might actually feel a sense of relief, you know, but at the same time, the sense of loss. And this is all part of the things that goes with grief. So what is the difference between when you're grieving and when you're mourning? What is the difference with that? It's important for us to know. Grief is the feeling of loss and pain that follows the death of a loved one. And the mourning is simply your outward demonstration of that. Different cultures have different ways of mourning. Some people will wear black. Some people actually, in some celebration, you have to wear black, white colors. In the ancient times, the Jews would put ashes on their face. You know, there's different ways that we demonstrate loss, but mourning is essential for healing. There has to be, you have to mourn. Don't listen to anyone who says that, oh, you know, we quote scriptures that people always say, oh, it's okay, they've gone to a better place, it is well, all of these things. Look, it is okay to mourn. You are expected to mourn. Even God talked about mourning all through the Old Testament. So it is essential for you to mourn so you can get to the place of healing. So whatever your customs will be, whatever your ritual will be, find the ritual, find the custom, find something that helps you go through that mourning stage. We have a bath that sometimes I administer to people. It's a herbal bath, and you can do it anywhere. You know, it's an herbal bath. It doesn't have to be herbal for you. You could do anything. It could be some aromatherapy, and you just soak into it. We play really sad, you know, melodious song. It's African tunes, and women have found healing in that bath. You know, they will sob and sob and sob, and at the end of it, we always have another woman. Once they come out, another woman will just embrace them and just love on them. It is very powerful. You can recreate it anywhere if you want to. These are the stages of grief, and they are not linear, like we just talked about. You know, sometimes you might be in denial, confusion. You know, you might be elated. You know, shocked, fear. It might seem like a dream. It might seem as if this is not really happening. I remember when I lost my mother, I would walk around thinking I was just going to wake up one morning and she'll be right there, or I would see her in different places. You know, anger, and then you're mad. Like, why did this happen? Like, God, you know, why did you not answer my prayer? Why did this person have to die? I remember when people will say to you, and they'll say, you know, I prayed and I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, and what didn't happen? My stepmother also passed, and one of the we had so many victories on this woman where we'll go to the hospital and they'll say, oh, she's dying, and then she'll come back, and then she still died. And I was just flabbergasted. I'm like, why did we have all of these miracles all just for her to die? You know, it didn't make any sense. You know, frustration, irritation, anxiety could be there, you know, and then you go to bargaining. You know, it's like, okay, if you do this, I'll do that, you know. Or you could go to your sense of in the sense of helplessness, hostility. You could totally want to avoid it. If you hear nothing today, one of the things I want you to hear is it's okay to grieve. It's okay to grieve. It's okay. It is needed. You have to mourn in order to get healed. You have to mourn. Depression can set in, and depression, you're struggling to find meaning. You're reaching out. You're not reaching out to others, or you're reaching out to others. You know, you're telling your story. Those kind of things happen during that phase. And then there's a space of after the trauma, post-traumatic growth is what we call it. Post-traumatic growth. And when you get to the post-traumatic growth sense, it's a sense of acceptance. It has been integrated. You've accepted it. Now you can move on and go into another place. But these particular stages are not linear, like I said. They're literally you can be on denial today and go to bargaining tomorrow. It doesn't have to be one step at a time, if that makes sense. All right. Let's talk about this. The stages are not linear. This is what they look like on the right. Some are the symptoms of grief. Some symptoms of grief are physical, sleep disturbances, shortness of breath, tightness in your throat, physical distress, weight changes. Emotional symptoms would look like sadness, you know, anger, guilt, anxiety, loneliness. Some behavioral ones are forgetfulness, searching for the disease, wandering aimlessly, worrying more about others, wanting to make them feel comfortable, needing to retell the story of the loved one's death, and sometimes it could be suicidal thoughts. And there's a lot more, but these are some of the normative I wanted to include this in my talk today, ambiguous loss. And this happens very difficult when you lose somebody, but you don't have the facts surrounding the loss of that loved one. It is difficult to mourn. It's difficult to mourn intently when you're not sure about why they died, what happened, or sometimes you don't even know where their body is. At that point, a lot of people who lost loved ones during the COVID pandemic, who were not even allowed to go there, they can suffer from ambiguous loss because it freezes your grief. Your grief is frozen in time because you don't have enough information to actually get to the point where you grieve the person. If you're that kind of person, please get help, reach out. It is very important. These are some of the grief guideposts I want to drop for us today. Acknowledging that this is grief. It is okay. You are in grief. When you grieve, don't rush out of it. Don't rush out of it. Take time. It is inbuilt. God has given that ability to grieve and permission to feel all your feelings. Don't run away from it. Because if you don't go through the grieving process, it's going to hit you like a ton of bricks later. It's going to come back. So it's not like you're fast tracking it. You might not grieve right now, and then in 5-10 years, you then have to go through that grieving process again. So allow yourself to grieve. Permission to feel all your feelings, feel all of it, feel all of them. Don't run away from it. We usually want to run away from our feelings. It's okay to feel that. And that's the one thing I always tell people. Honor the uniqueness of your grieving. We don't all grieve the same way, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Nurture yourself, reach out for help and finding hope. I'm going to talk about a lot of this. Once you identify what we're grieving as, grief, and acknowledge the presence of the losses we're experiencing, then we can honor our feelings and begin to make the sense of this new world. So any kind of grief, if it's of your loved ones, and I know we're talking about widowhood today, but any kind of grieving, divorce is one of them. If you've been divorced, don't just jump into another relationship. Don't just go into anything. Even if you just lost a husband, don't just move into another relationship. Sometimes if you want to do that because it helps to fill the void, but what you will then do is jump into a relationship that brings the grief into that relationship. So instead of 2 people being in the new relationship, there's 3 of you in that relationship. And so please take the time, if that makes sense. You grieve because you love. The loss of a loved one to death, loss of an important celebration, loss of a job, loss of a relationship, loss of social gathering, supporting someone else through loss. All of these things, you need to take time to grieve it. Sometimes it's writing a letter to your loved one. I want you to leave this with you. If you haven't written a letter to your loved one, especially if the loved one was a conflicted relationship, and that means that you guys, you were fighting, maybe you were even almost about to separate and the person died, or it was just tumultuous. Don't get yourself together and write and do a memorial. Write a letter to that person, tell them how you feel, and then extend the grace. And then you say, you know what, you lived your best, you did the best you could. I wish you could have done better, and if this would have happened, say everything you want to say to them, and then do something with that letter. Don't keep it. You can bury the letter, you can burn it, and you can do whatever it is, but it needs to be a closure with that particular letter and what I think that you write. It's important to do that so that you can close the door to the unfinished business that you had. So every time, every feeling you can imagine can be a part of grieving, but make sure that you feel them all. And I'm going to close in a minute. I was telling you that it's the uniqueness of grief. And I know there was a speaker that was talking about, I think, I don't remember the name right now, the lady who lost her husband and said she took off the black clothing when she I think 4 months she said she was done. Everybody grieves in their unique ways. What works for her might not work for you. What works for somebody else might not work for you, but you have your own way to grieve. You have a unique personality, and so you grieve your own way. Some people get their energy from other people, so they need people around them. Some people get energy from inward, they're introverted, then they will need to isolate. So whatever and however you want to do, you could find what it is. Cultural, spiritual, and religious background are very important. During the grieving process, it's important that you, if you're a spiritual person, to be spiritual. If you're religious, to be religious. It's okay to say they've gone home to be with the Lord. It's okay to say that they're in a better place. There's nothing wrong with that. And if culture helps us sometimes. It helps us do the ritual of grief. So if you have a culture, or you can develop your own culture, there's a culture that says, for example, wake keeping is cultural. In some religions, in the Jewish religion, they have what they call, they keep Shiva for 7 days. In some African religions, they do the same thing, where you just come in and you can mourn, you can cry, you can just sit quietly, you can do anything, but always have a ritual. Rituals help us go through the grieving process very well. Nurture yourself when you're ready for it. Nurture yourself. It is important to give ourselves far more space and time than we usually do. When we're grieving, normal day-to-day self-care may not be enough. So take the time, and I'm going to list some things here for you to do. One thing you have to know is that grief is stored in the body. Trauma is stored in the body. Your body feels it before your mind feels it. And so it is in the body. And that is why it is important to do a few things. So especially if you have children, they might tell you they have a headache, a stomach ache. They might actually be grieving. So make sure that you notice your body, be more in touch with your body. You need to move a little bit more. Go for walks, drink plenty of water. Slow down, because trauma gets you like this, it gets you all, if you're constantly on alert, if you're constantly finding yourself, just worrying too much, oh my God, what's going to happen? What's this? That's trauma. You have to slow it down. You have to slow things down. You have to tell your body you're no longer being traumatized now. Find a way to rest, eat well, and all will begin to integrate in your brain that things are going to be okay. You find that you might find it very difficult to think during this time. You might be forgetful. You might find yourself being forgetful. You might be a little bit easily overwhelmed. Little things overwhelm you. And you or maybe confused thoughts. It is a good thing to do right now to ask yourself, what do I need right now? So when those confusion times are going, what do I need right now? What do I need right now? And what is being asked of me today? And what I say is, do the next best thing. You don't have to do all of the things, but do the next best thing you can. If the next best thing is for you to call or just sit down on your bed, then that's the next best thing. You can make a list of your goals and action to take, but it's also good for you to take time just to be, just to be. Many people cope with grief by doing, but sometimes it's okay to not do anything. It's okay. It's okay not to do anything at that time, and your body needs it because it's being overactive. You're on a high, and we need to bring it down. Nurture your social self. Hugs are good if you don't mind them. A hand on the shoulder, a pat on the shoulder, talking to somebody. And if you feel like you need to isolate, that's okay, but don't isolate for too long, because we are connected. We're connected beings. Please try mindfulness. It's very important. And because during mindfulness, you have self-compassion. You're able to center on yourself, on your today. Be kind to yourself, be gentle to yourself, be tender towards you. Sometimes it starts by just lowering your voice. Your voice is not all that elevated. Just lower it a little bit and pace yourself in the way you talk to yourself and you talk to people. and do one good thing each day that brings you pleasure. If it's to read a poem, if it's to listen to music, if it's to pray or meditate, if it's to go outside, nurture your soul and nurture your heart. And I've talked about nature. This is my last screen for you guys today. Plan your self-care. Don't just take it for granted. Plan it. Mental, physical, emotional. Say what you're going to do for that week for yourself. Reach out for support if you're struggling. Please do not stay alone in grief. There are wonderful, wonderful counselors around, and that is my 20 minutes. Thank you for inviting me, and I wish you well.
Okay, hi, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank Princess Folaji for this wonderful idea. It's always great to see powerful ladies and gentlemen coming together to try and create a platform or a forum to try and help each other, help people in need, help people that, some people I've heard some very, very powerful and amazing speech, I hope more people that have been silent yesterday will come out today and start expressing themselves, start, seeking for help. And if there's anything that we can all do together to help, it will be good for us to contribute to the good of our widows or people that have lost children as well, that have lost parents. Honestly, it's a really, really amazing idea. When she told me about it straight away, I said, it's always good to help each other. She went through her own time, and it was tough for her. I remember there was a time where we would speak, you can feel like it's very difficult, and it's amazing to see how she turned it around and come up with this wonderful idea to say, look, you know what, I know that other people out there are like me, and I want to create a forum or a word where everybody will come together and support one another, support each other. I'm very, very happy with that. Now, I'm going to speak to now about preparing tomorrow today. That's very important, because the mistake a lot of people make, first of all, I work as a chief regional director for a company called Unishow. We intermediary brokerage firm for insurance. We do all sorts of insurances except car insurance, and I also the CEO of Cedric Show Limited, because I created my own company under the main company, and I run a region of about 200 plus people, 214 or 15 now. I try and count it. Funny enough, Thursday I think I was doing a roundup with my team, my admin, and I've got 240 plus still recruiting. So if even out there there's anyone that is looking for an opportunity to help the community, to help people protect their asset, the future, and if they have something, if they have what it takes, I'll be more than happy to give them the opportunity to work with them myself, to train them, and to make sure tomorrow they can contribute and help others. Okay, so what I want to talk about is the fact that in our community, unfortunately, I would say probably 70-75% of us have not prepared tomorrow properly. Like, we have to realize that death is inevitable, one way or the other. One day the Lord will call us and we will go. And when you know that at some point you will go, it's important to put things in place now. So if it ever happens, it's an unfortunate situation, but you don't want to leave your family with a burden. Like, for example, we do all sorts of insurances. We also cover people from when they're alive with things like income protection. Like, if you're ill today, you can't work for accidents or sickness, we don't want you to rush back to work. So we make sure we pay you a salary while you're resting, while you're recovering, while you're being treated, and things like that. So you can stay at home and still have submit to your means and getting paid of something. Now, we also have things like critical illness. Like, sometimes when we're critically ill, the things that rush us to death is stress. When you're critically ill, you can't work, you're in pain, your bills are not paid, you start not thinking, what am I going to do? Where am I going to turn to? Well, you turn to the NHS. Not just respect the NHS, but sometimes when your treatment will cost too much money, you go in the queue if there's no donor. If there's nobody to give the rest of the money, you're on a queue. But when you got insurance, you got critical illness insurance or private medical insurance, then you become a priority because you pay for the treatment. So sometimes it costs you a fee, but it's important to put yourself in a position where you know that, okay, I'll pay for my treatment and I'll get treated quicker. You know, like we have also life insurance. Life insurance is one of the most important. Like when people have mortgages, like my auntie Jennifer was saying earlier, you have to plan things. You have to have everything you possess, your assets are part of your estate. Now, when something happened to you, all your estate get added up. If your estate at more, the threshold is 325,000, if I'm right. I don't know if it's gone up, but it's 325,000 pounds. Anything above that, you get taxed. So if you got assets worth, I don't know, 1 million, 1.5, or 800,000, your family will not inherit all your assets if you pass away. If it's not done properly, then they won't inherit it. But if it's done properly, then there's some money that can be paid by the insurer to the government, to the tax people. So all the assets goes to the family. So it's important to have all the insurances in place, because a lot of people always think, okay, do you know what, I don't need it, or things like that. And then when they really need it, they can't get it, because if you're already healed, unfortunately, there is certain insurance that you cannot have. So what I'm gonna say to everyone today, I'm gonna put my details at the end, is make sure you speak to a personal insurance advisor. Also, a lot of people go and take insurance from the bank. Bank, unfortunately, they do recommend, but they don't advise. I think at the moment, even they've stopped doing that because the FCA was really tackling on them with the fact that they were just recommending. With insurance, it's important to get advice. Is that when you want to buy a house, you just don't go to the bank and say, oh, I want to buy a house. You get a broker, an advisor that will look into the market for you and make sure you get the best deal, you get the best rate, you get the best property. It's important. It's the same thing with things like insurance. It's important to have an advisor, and the advice is free. You don't pay for it. You sit down with myself, I explain to you, I look at your portfolio, I look at what your needs, and can also listen to your wants at the time, but your needs are always the most important. So when I look at, for example, you got, say somebody has 2 or 3 properties, I know already roughly how much the property worth. I cover the mortgage, the main house. I look at how much inheritance tax you can be facing. Like, there's a lot of things when it comes to protection. Preparing tomorrow, today, is the most valuable thing. Is the best gift you can do to your family. Is the best gift you can do to your children. Because a lot of people say, I work hard. I've got this. Like, I remember a couple of years back, I had a client. He was a doctor. He had 7 properties. The wife had insurance. He never wanted insurance. He said, oh, they got all that, so they're fine. And unfortunately, something happened to him. And the wife couldn't get all the property because they were not married. She was the mother of the children, but they were not married. So automatically, the inheritance tax kicks in because all the wealth goes to the children. Now, the threshold passed a long time, and they lost, I think you remember, 3 houses. I think they have to lose 3 houses, some money were lost. And I mean, there was a massive, massive loss for the family. Why? Because the husband, the partner, didn't prepare his departure properly. So I would stress everybody in this platform today to really, really take time, sit down, talk about it. When you do your insurances, make sure after you put them on a trust. So they cover, they're not part of your estate. They go into a trust, and then the trust pay the respective person without the money hitting your account again. There's so much things that needs to be done when it comes to insurance, to protection, to preparing the future, that I will really, really encourage everybody to look into that. And I will be more than happy to do it. It is free of charge. It's a conversation. We can sit down, talk about it, then you tell me what you need, how you want it to be. If it's the right way, I encourage you to do it straight away. If I believe something is wrong, I will advise you. But at the end of the day, it's your decision. What I am an advisor. So I will definitely give you advice on how I believe you should do it, and then we put in place for you. But it's a working relationship. I work for you, and I make sure you are well looked after, and your assets are well protected. And this is what I wanted to discuss with you today. And I really, really encourage people, because you see, in our community, the biggest problem is lack of knowledge. There's a lot of things we can do together. That's why when somebody creates this kind of platform, I always want to be part of it. I always want to give my own contribution, my own knowledge, because if we know so much, if we knew so much yesterday, we wouldn't be where we are today. We'll be far ahead. Our children, us, will be far ahead. but our parents didn't know how to do certain things. Our parents didn't know how to plan certain things. Our parents didn't know what to do. So if anything happened to them, we are fine, carrying on, financially, emotionally, and all that. But now today, with everything that we have, with the great lawyers, the psychiatrists, all the great speakers that I've heard, with Princess Fulaji herself as well, we have to now learn how to say, look, this is what we have. Let's come together. Let's help the community. Let's support one another. Let's grow one another. Let's encourage one another. Let's really make sure tomorrow our children knows what generational wealth is. There's another insurance, for example, that only few companies do. We call it family income benefit. It's a great product. What it does is, if anything happened to the parent, God forbid, you pay a salary to the person that will look after your children. So instead of that person cashing out on the life insurance to look after your children, so when the children grow up, there's no legacy for them. The family income benefit will pay them a salary until your child is, financially free, or until your child is 23, 25, whatever you want. And once your child hit that age, then the life insurance that you prepare for them can be paid to them. I mean, there's a lot of things that I can do, I can play with, I can help families and friends. So please do get in touch with me. My details are on the chat. I put my number, my email address as well. So please do contact me, or you can contact Princess Fulaji and she'll reach me easily, or she'll pass me on your details and I will definitely look after you. And that was me. That was it for me today. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share what I could for our people. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Princess, for this opportunity to talk about the passion that it's all consuming for me. It's about mental health, and mental health, it's a topic that affects all of us. I'm happy that we've spoken that, most of the speakers have taken quite a lot of what I would have said, but however, there's still a lot to say. Quickly, how can we provide early intervention to widowhood, to mental health? Very, 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 very deep question. And that's the question that I know that somebody else has answered. I think Cedric just mentioned it now. None of us plan to die. I liked what Dilly said when she spoke earlier as well. The fact that nobody plans for death. And that's unfortunate in our community. And that's why a lot of us don't write wills. Jennifer mentioned that. We don't look at all the details of the things Jennifer mentioned. What Cedric just mentioned now, somebody who had 7 properties and the government took away 3. Can you imagine 40% of all the things you worked hard for being taken away by government? These are things we need to think about. So how can we prevent? How can we put early intervention in place? Very deep question. For widows, for African widows, there's so many things that can be done. I'm just going to quickly share on my screen. Okay, I'm looking for my presentation on the screen. Bear with me one moment. Just looking for it. Fantastic. There we go. Okay, I'm just going to quickly share. I'm going to whistle stop through this. Absolutely speak very fast. So you will have to pardon me because I would have to speak fast because there's just so much I've packed into this presentation. Importance of early intervention in preventing mental health problems in African widows. Can I just ask, because coincidentally, I spoke at another event this week about an African widow. It's a platform of over 5,000 widows in Nigeria. It was sponsored by United Nations. And one of the key things that I did plead for, that we should add into that, is not just widows, it is also widowers. Because the process of grief, the process of loss, applies to both male and female. However, I do totally acknowledge the fact that the experience is different, the cultural alienation, the stigma is a lot more for women than men. I totally agree with that. But however, sometimes the emotional role is absolutely the same. So why are we talking about mental health, and why are we talking about the need for us to prevent, for us to talk about prevention? Why are we talking about early intervention? I'll just quickly go through a summary of how WHO defines mental health. And it says it's a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. It's not just the absence of a disease or infirmity. It is a complete state. It is your ability to be able to Fulfill your potentials. Let me give the full definition now. Your ability to recognize your potentials, fulfill your potentials, recognize life stressors, be able to deal with those life stressors when they come. And if I may ask, how many of us are able to deal with those life stressors when they come? And in this instance, we're talking bereavement. Bereavement is a major life stressor that a lot of us struggle with, and that's the truth. We don't go through the process. Yes, there's the grieving, there's the mourning, but oftentimes our culture pushes us out of grief. We're told it is well, and I love the fact that Dilly said, she mentioned and banned that word. It is not well. Don't tell me it is well. We're a very religious, very, very cultural set of people, which is fine, because our culture, when you look at them, they actually have processes to help us through some of the emotions they didn't understand, and they had to put those things in to help us go through them. Our cultures are there for a purpose. Wearing the black is for a purpose, but there you have the option, staying indoors for about 3 months and not going out, and then not allowing you to interact with other people is for a purpose. All of those things they've mentioned there for a purpose, but however, we do know that culture evolves. Culture absolutely evolves. So to attain an improvement in mental health of individuals, it is really important for us to recognize first and foremost, these are the challenges that we have. This statistics is 2001, and there's been a lot that has happened, particularly from last year up till now. We have about 450 million people alive today, I think it's more, who suffer from mental disorders. And these are the ones that have been diagnosed. And don't forget, the psychiatrist in me would, the psychiatrist out there would probably understand. And I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Lade Hepzibah Olubeni. I am a mental health first aid instructor. I'm a mental health advocate. I am a lawyer. I'm a mother. And I'm a grandmother as well. And I work in one of the local authorities in I was going to say Nigeria, in London here. Yes, my organization works in Nigeria as well. We have a foundation, we have an NGO in Nigeria. We work very actively with the psychiatric hospitals. We work very actively with a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists in Nigeria, obviously because we know that it's very expensive to deliver mental health services in Nigeria. So 1 in 4 will be affected. And when we talk about affected, we're not talking about diagnosis. We're talking about being affected by mental health disorder at one stage or at one stage in their life. So it might be a disorder, it might be a mental health issue. And these are things for us to recognize. So it was bear with me one moment. It was estimated in 2001 that by the year 2020, depression will become the second leading cause. And may I say, at 2021, depression is not the second, depression is the highest. And that is why we do need to talk about depression. And don't forget that one of the things that we lack at the moment is statistics about widows, is statistics, and I think Dr. Ajayi implied this in his presentation about the fact that we don't have enough statistics. So you're finding out that governments are not able to put things in place. So I did a presentation, I did a training recently about responsible suicide reporting for Africa, for Nigerian journalists. And one of the key things that I mentioned is about the lack of statistics, the lack of data that we need to talk about. And that is why it's important for us to talk about how do we prevent. Prevention, there are different types of prevention. So I've listed some out here. There's universal prevention. That is where you target the general public or a whole population. There's a selective prevention that distills from the universal one. And this is where you target individual subgroups, like now we're talking in particular about widows. This is the third one, is indicated prevention. This is where you've identified the high risk factors, those who are in the high risk groups. And we know that. It's a fact that for us who are in UK, we know that the BAME community have been 4 times more disproportionately affected by COVID. Not just COVID, it's the issue of the Black Lives Matter. It's the fact that we are disadvantaged by so many things on almost all platforms, economic, social, name it. And so that straight away puts us in the high risk factor group. And these are things that government and strategic people should be putting, to be factoring when they come out with their national strategy. So straight away, you know that these are things that can happen. The fourth one is when we now agree to put an intervention in place. So let's just talk about prevention. I'm still talking about prevention. I'm speaking so fast because I want to go quickly through my slide. One of the things we want to do around prevention, and that was why last year I wrote a book on breaking barriers. around mental health issues, and it's early intervention into mental health issues, especially in our community. How do we break those boundaries? How do we break those various things that have affected our conversations? Strategies for mental health promotion. One of the key things that I would always say, how do we break the barriers? How do we make sure that there's early intervention out there? The major number one thing that I will say is promotions, education, awareness. And I'm going to put this down into a particular context. We are known in our community to be a community that has one of the highest numbers of stigma when we talk about mental ill health. Yes, we're gradually recognizing it now, but you hear us in a various religious settings says, minus me and my family. No, depression, okay, never, it will never happen to me. I will snap out of it. By the time I go to, this dance hall, by the time I go and dance, by the time my friends come, I will get out of it. I will snap out of it. That has been a lie that we have told ourselves for a long time in our community, because I love what Dr. Merijo said earlier, trauma. A lot of people in our community are dealing with trauma or have trauma that have not been dealt with. And she said something that I actually put up in the chat. Trauma stays in the body. Trauma transfers. Trauma can sometimes be transgenerational, where you pass, especially where you pass to the next generation, especially where it was not dealt with. I had a trauma when I lost my mother at the age of 12. I had to become the wife, the mother, the auntie to my younger ones. And the trauma stayed with me until I got into my 40s and I had a mental health breakdown because the trauma stayed in the body. The trauma stays in the body, and that's why we need to remove the stigma in our communities around mental health. I'm going to try around mental illness. I'm trying to make this as succinct as possible because, if you want to get my book, I have a book that I wrote. It's on Amazon, Breaking the Barriers, Early Intervention into Mental Health. It lists out, very long list of the various barriers that we have and how we can break them. Changing the use of our language. How do we describe mental illness in our community? Because you realize that language pervades stigma. Language drives stigma. It's the fact that it's so easy for us to call somebody, she has not used her medication, Yaba left, arrow, cycle. Please feel free to type any other negative ways in which we in our community have used to describe mental illness. Please just type them down. Please feel free to type them down. How have you and I described mental illness? This is the reason why people want to keep quiet. I want to say, no, not in my family. We don't have mad people in my family. Because we've used such words to describe. Community intervention is very key, and I'm glad that Princess has set this up. We need to challenge the negative stereotype. We can't keep quiet and expect the government to do it alone. It's about challenging those negative stereotypes that we have in our community. We need to learn to become our brothers and our sisters' keeper. Yes, I've written sisters' keeper there. I'm saying brother as well. We need to be our brother and our sisters' keeper. We need to set up NGOs and be a voice. So I'll put this question up here. How many words? How can we challenge? How many words do you know to describe mental illness? Be a comrade. Let's normalize the use of right words. Let's challenge. All of us have mental health. I know that people sometimes describe mental illness as mental health, or that person has mental health. We all have mental health. We need to get people to be able to be at ease to describing and talking about their issues. When we create, part of our community intervention is creating a platform like this. These are some of the key things we need to do as per early intervention. And I'm going to you see some points that I'm going to put up later. We need to identify and provide effective early support to women and men generally, especially when we identify those who are in the risk groups, because it would definitely improve the quality of the widow and the family life. Widows have children. They have uncles, they have people who are depending on them. When we identify and we offer early intervention quickly, it helps to improve the quality of life. It also helps them to better support their mental health and the mental health of those who are around them. Research actually suggests that early help can protect widows and their children from harm. It is the fact that depression is hanging in there. They have children they have to take care of. We need to intervene early. Don't wait until that person calls you. Be your sister and brother's keeper. It is a knock on the door. It is, how are you? You may not have a solution, you may not have anything, but the fact that that person knows that you have their ears and you're listening to them. Reduce, and this will actually help to reduce the referral to child protection. I've put this here because of the African setting. Do you know the conference I said that I spoke at on Thursday? One of the key things the widow said there was that they lash out at their children. When the child comes and say, "Mom, where is daddy?" They're lashing out at the children. And this would help to reduce the referral for child protection services or any other thing. And it's absolutely important. We need to be able to identify, bear with me one moment. We need to be able to identify very quickly, we need to be able to identify very quickly where the support needs are and how we can support people. So yes, early intervention is not something for one person to do. It is a work for all of us in our community to do. I am more for community intervention. I'm more for us being a true brother and sister's keeper, not just playing lip service out in the community. We'll get on the social media, we see ourselves on the social media, we talk, pick up the phone and talk. Social media, you may see me like this, you don't know what's going on with me. I just got up, you don't know whether I just got up crying. Yes, I may paint a picture outside. A lot of us are carrying pains in our heart that oftentimes we cannot express outside because we don't know who is genuine, who will come back 6 months after the event to check out for you. I'm asking us and I'm challenging us, and I'm hoping this is one of the things that African Wonder Woman is going to take on board, challenging everybody about the need for us as a community to identify early intervention and prevention. Prevention will be around people understanding what mental ill health is, understanding what the signs are. I know that Dr. Meriho talked about some of the signs, understanding what the signs are, understanding the services where people can get help, and understanding some of the little things you can do to protect yourself. Take a time out. You're not superhuman. It's okay to cry. It's okay not to be okay. Nobody should tell you not to grieve. Your grief can take as long. Nobody should tell you it's 2 years now, you should be over it. No, it can take as long. I still mourn my mother that died 43 years ago. I'm still mourning her. I still cry. I'm actually writing a book at the moment about trauma, about the effect of trauma and the impact on all of us.
They were down to 2 minutes, just a 2-minute warning. Yes.
Just rounding up now. In fact, I thought my time was up. And that's why we need to talk about trauma. We cannot just get over it. We need to be there, reaching out for each other and being our brothers' keepers. Thank you so much for listening to me. And I'm hoping that, from all of the things we've said today, we would all become comrades, go out into the community and recognize that issues are real. And we cannot any longer in our community pretend that they're not there. We cannot. We just have to identify them, get in contact with the services that are there, and we intend to put services up. Like I said, in Africa, trauma is a major issue that we need to deal with. And we need to be able to support people all the way from here. Well done, Princess. Well done. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Stefalaji, for inviting me to this wonderful occasion. I actually wrote this spoken word for Black History Month. And I think, but it fits perfectly into this occasion because it talks about, I'm sure everyone of us have heard of Rosa Parks, but there was a predecessor to Rosa Parks, and this is who I'm trying to sort of honor through my spoken word. And I think it's perfect because it talks about being stoic in the face of challenges. And so the title of my poem is called I Will Not Move. Hi, I have traveled the abacus of time and woken from beyond to tell you of this auspicious day. The sun was bright, the trees whispered and danced a tango, paying homage to their creator. The day pregnant with destiny. The birds tweeted my unspoken mission, be still my beating heart, my rite of passage to history awaits. That day. I sometimes questioned my humanity, questioned if I was loved by him. I've come to hate my journey, to hate that word, segregation. Raised on Negro spirituals, smothered by God's hands, I knew better. My oppressors will not win, they did not know better. Today I stand for change, today I stand in the face of oppression and I say no, enough. I feel exceptional courage as I climb on the bus of change. The inflammation of oppression flares up again. I am afraid I will not move, I am human. Cut me deep and my blood will flow. Look at me and feel my soul. Look at me and see my fragments shaking. Look at me and see my essence. Look at me and see my heart beating. Beating, beating, beating. Beating thousands of beatings. I hear the cries of my forefathers begging to be seen. My freedom paid by their blood, sweat, and tears. I stand for them. I sit. I will not move. This is beyond fear, beyond repercussion, beyond me. Truth was my cloak, courage my dagger, the voices of my ancestors urging me on, the unforeseen inspiration in my soul, the myriads of angels giving me hope. I stand for justice. I sit for dignity. I will not move. I adjusted my glasses, my hands forming a feast of resolute. I will not move. As I came in with their batons, I remember the words of Harriet Tubman. There was one of two things I had a right to, liberty or death. If I could not have one, I would have the other. Whenever people ask me, why didn't you get up? I said to them, Harriet Tubman's hands were pushing me down on one shoulder, and the Sojourner Truth's hands were pushing me down on the other shoulder. I will not move. I am afraid. I will not move. I am human. When you need courage, when you need to stand up for destiny, let the sands of time whisper my courage to you. Let my stilly face show an example of the way to go. I receive blessings from the Most High. Believe there are myriads of heavenly witnesses watching, spurring you on, asking you to do the right thing. The inevitable freedom came my enthused. I borrowed the words of my forerunner. When I found I had crossed that line, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees, and over the fields I felt like I was in heaven. The inevitable freedom came. I enthused. I will not move. I paved the way for Rosa Parks. I sowed the seed for freedom. I started a movement. What is my name, you ask? My name is Claudette Colvin, and I'm only 15 years old. Thank you.